Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. For today's webinar, I'm joined by Giles Watkins, who will be presenting on how to achieve positive sleep and transform your life. In a moment, I'll pass over to Giles to begin his presentation. But before I do, I'd just like to let everyone know that this session will have polls and a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the session, don't worry, type these into the question tab and we hopefully get time at the end to answer all of these. For any unanswered questions, don't worry, Giles has kindly agreed to answer these following the webinar and he'll be in touch shortly. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Giles to begin the session.
Thanks so much, Paul, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everybody out there, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining me today on a blustery autumn day here in the UK, I have to say. I'm really delighted that you're joining, and I trust that we'll have a really stimulating next hour of dialogue and Q&A as well about sleep and why sleep makes such a big, the importance of sleep and why it's so positive in our lives. The structure of the presentation today will be that I will tell you briefly about my sleep story and give you an idea as to why you should listen to what I have to say about sleep and why it might be of interest to you. I'll run a couple of quick polls, I think 3 quick polls that Paul will administer for me to get a sense from you as to what's happening with your sleep at the moment. I will share something about some sleep science. It's a very new area of science, sleep, relative to many other disciplines. I'll give you a little overview of why it's important, and then I'll move very quickly into the business case for sleep, because after all, this is a association of MBAs and business graduates group, and so why sleep will help you in your business, both as an individual and as a group, in terms of the groups that you work in or indeed lead, is, I think, extremely important. So that will be a fair chunk of the presentation. And then I'll move into the area of top tips, because people always ask me, how can I sleep better? And what are your tips based on your experience? So that will then be the sort of the last section of the presentation. Hopefully that will take around 40 to 45 minutes, and we can move into Q&As. So please do send some questions, because frankly that will make that can really make the presentation even more lively and even more informative, because the chances are the question that you've got is a similar question to one that someone else has. So why me? Well, I've written a book about sleep and I've called it Positive Sleep, because I believe very much in the power and the value of sleep for all of us. And if you can just hold the line a second. That's better. Yes, so apologies for that. So talking about why sleep matters and what my story is around sleep. This first slide is an illustration of me napping. I came from a family which encouraged napping, and naps and when to have them and why they can be beneficial is something I will touch on during this story. But I think I had a fairly normal upbringing when it comes to sleep, apart from that it was something that was encouraged in my family. Perhaps not so common in the UK at that time in the 70s. And I slept really, really well until I had a bit of a crisis around sleep in my late 30s. I was about to be married, and my fiance, who was from France, was very distressed by a reorganization in the large company that I was involved in or working for at the time, and she didn't really understand this concept of reapplying for your job during a reorganization. She thought I was being sacked. Now, I was newly engaged and about to be married and feeling very much about that's the world I wanted to create, a stable home environment and planning to have a family and so forth. And the stress of this change and the stress of my fiance's view of this caused me to suddenly start having problems with sleep in a way I'd never had. I was about 36 or 37 at the time. And then, of course, once I had that problem, it just continued. And the slide shows that, there was, I became a father, My mother died during that period. I started doing various increasingly responsible jobs for the organization I worked for all over the world, moved to China and then Indonesia and Sri Lanka, and changed jobs, you know, every few years over a period of a decade. And gradually my sleep got worse and worse and worse, to the point that I would habitually get up at 3 a.m. Having gone to sleep at about 9 or 9:30, and get up at 3 a.m. and not be able to go back to sleep, and choose as well, choose not to go back to sleep. Think that 3 a.m. somehow was a great time to start work. Now, the upside was that I did a master's, like yourselves. I did a master's in INSEAD in change management, and actually ended up writing a thesis all about sleep, which is how I came to write the book and how I come to do these webinars. But the downside was considerable. I mean, I was falling asleep in the early evening and really struggling. And the illustration I've got here of me asleep in a doorway actually happened. I was out at a business dinner in Sri Lanka, surrounded by senior people, CEOs of different businesses and directors and so forth, felt incredibly tired, went out for a walk, and was found by one of those people a few minutes later, having just gone around the corner to sleep, not intending to sleep, but to sit outside a house that was just around the corner from this best restaurant in Colombo, and I'd fallen asleep. So there I was, supposedly CEO of a large business with a good career and a lot of the things that people aspire to. But in reality, I was in an extremely bad state because of my lack of sleep. So that was me in 2014, and that was what really, that moment was what triggered me to say, I need to do something about this, and write the thesis and write the book and come to be talking to you. So I've put together a poll to get a bit of an idea of how your sleep is, especially during COVID, and whether it's been affected by the changes that have happened in the last 6 months. So, or for longer, in fact, 9 months for those who are living further east from here. So Paul, can you launch the first poll?
Yes, so we've got the first poll. It's just gone live, so we'll give everyone a few more moments to just answer it, and then I'll be able to give you the results. So we're pretty much almost there with everyone answering. Okay, so the poll is, in the last month, how long do you think you were typically sleeping in 24-hour period? We have had 4% say up to 4.5 hours. We have had 34% say more than 4.5 hours and up to including 6 hours. We have got 37% say more than 6 hours and up to including 7.5 hours. And we have 22% say more than 7.5 hours and up to including 9 hours. And we have 2% say more than 9 hours.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, that's a fairly typical spread. I think it's fair to say that the optimum that is often talked about is in the 7.5 hour area, 7.5 to 8 hours for people to sleep, but most people can survive on 6 hours plus, although there will be some effect on probably their cognition and so forth. Anything under 6 hours, I think it's fair to say you are short sleeping. Okay, next, Paul.
Perfect. So we just launched the second poll. So we'll just give it a few more moments for everyone to answer. Just to remind the audience that we will have a Q&A session at the end. So keep your questions coming in. We'll collate them, and obviously we'll put them forward to Giles to answer in the Q&A section. So we've pretty much got everyone answering the question. So, okay. So the question was, how does this compare to the amount you were sleeping before COVID-19 pandemic? So we've had 19% say more than before, 11% have said less than before, 69% have said about the same, and 1% don't know.
Well, that's great to hear, because in many, that's actually distinctly different from the last 3 webinars I've done in the last 6 weeks. with groups both in Singapore and more in the UK, where more people were actually mentioning the fact that they were up to sort of 30–40% of people were saying they were sleeping worse. So that's great to hear, actually, because the reason I ask about COVID is not just because of the anxiety that obviously can affect people's sleep and the stress that is being induced by it, but also the fact that many people are working from home more than before and they're losing their usual rhythm of work. And that means that if you're working from home all the time, you can literally get up in the middle of the night and work and so forth. And a lot of people find that quite difficult to manage. So that's actually a really healthy result, I think. Paul, would you like to launch the third poll?
Excellent. Yep, third poll has just been launched. We'll just give it a few more moments for everyone to answer, and then we'll be able to go back into the presentation. So. Okay, so we've pretty much got everyone answered. So the question was, if the amount of sleep you have experienced has changed since COVID-19, what do you think is the underlying reason? So we have 8% say work stress, we have 8% say personal stress, we have 39% say work and personal stress, 43% say no difference, and 2% say don't know. So I'll hand back over to you, Giles.
Yeah, super, thank you. And again, that's a fairly common spread, I would say, from those that feel it has affected them. I think that it's difficult to differentiate between work and personal stress in many ways at this time, and a lot of people are finding that it has affected their sleep. Although I must say your results for question 2 were really very heartening. So let me give you a little bit of a definition of sleep, because it's important to know what it actually is. And there is only one definition that I've ever read that is really compelling, I think, and really comprehensive, which is that it's a phase of the day when activity drops compared to the balance of the 24 hours. As you can see from the slide, it's associated with a habitual posture. For us, that means lying down and closing our eyes. For other animals, they can actually do it standing up or hanging upside down and so forth. And of course, when we're asleep, we are less reactive to external stimuli. Perhaps the most important differentiator when you put all those together, because you could say, well, that's just the same as hibernation, is we can reverse the state relatively easily. And I guess that's one of the problems that many of us have, is the ability and the ease at which it can be reversed by someone nudging you or snoring or a baby crying and so forth. So that's what marks it out, if you like, from hibernation and being in a coma. So why we sleep is, pardon me, the subject of intense research these days, and I think Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, was a huge bestseller, and it's encyclopedic on the subject. I'm not going to attempt to be encyclopedic. I'm going to attempt to give you some key takeaways that you can understand easily and think, yeah, this is why it matters. Because sleep research has been going on really for the last 100 years. As I said, it's a relatively new area of science, and particularly in the neuroscience space, because the link between sleep and the brain is so strong. It's been discovered to be so strong. I mean, sleep is critical for our bodies, and actually later on I'll talk a little bit about sleep and how it affects elite athletes, and that in many ways is one of the best ways to illustrate how sleep affects our bodies, both positively and negatively. And I think that's one of the key things about sleep is, people tend to, I like, one of the reasons why I titled this talk Positive Sleep is, if you tonight got an hour or two more than before, if you're one of these people sleeping under 6 hours, for example, if you slept 7 or 8 hours tonight, you typically will feel far better for it. So unlike, say, smoking, which if you give it up, you get the benefits, but you probably only get they come in a few days later. With sleep, it is literally an overnight reversal. So if you have a bad night's sleep, you'll feel it the next day, but if you can then catch up on some of that sleep the following night and have a really good night, you'll feel much better. So you can really feel an incredible improvement immediately. And there are three main ways, particularly in the brain area, which I've illustrated with these three cartoons, if you like. Firstly, the one on the left is restoring the energy used by the brain. So sleep is incredibly important for that. And the energy, and as many of you will probably know, the brain uses an inordinate amount of energy for its size within the body. The second is to reorder and store important information acquired during the day. So you see here this brain standing on tiptoes, putting things in the filing cabinet, as it were. It's almost like every day we have a new operating system in our brain, and that is updated overnight, and sleep is the time when that happens. If you think of it like that, and typically that operating system is updated with something that we learned the day before. I went through a phase in about 2008 when I was incredibly stressed about work and thought I was going to lose my job. My family were living in Indonesia with me at the time, and the thing about losing a job then was not just that you lost your job, but you actually lost your work permit and your right to stay in that country. And they were very happy there, settled in school, etc. And I know from only sleeping an average of 2.5 hours a night for a month, that has a very debilitating effect on your body. You feel like you're lugging yourself around, frankly, but it's far worse for the brain. You just cannot process things. And of course, your stresses as well are just building up and building up and building up, sort of stacking night after night after night, because you're not integrating the learning into your operating system, your brain's operating system. And the last is that brain on the right-hand side there, lifting some weights. Is sufficient sleep is also needed for the development of new brain cells that are important to long-term memory. So three very good reasons from a brain point of view why sleep really matters. Now, what determines when we sleep? Well, it's the interaction of two systems. One is the circadian clock, sometimes known as the body clock or the circadian rhythm. And our natural rhythm, which has been worked out by people doing all sorts of experiments with people being locked away without sunlight, is to sleep circa 8 hours a day. That is our natural rhythm. Actually, when they did the initial experiments, people were sleeping closer to 9. And when they started to introduce sunlight into the experiment and actually have a day and a night as well, our natural rhythm seems to be around about 8 hours. Now, there will be people who put their hands up and say, oh, I only need 4 hours, I only need 6 hours, and so forth. There's been quite a lot of research around this, and I reckon the estimates on people who need less than 7.5 hours is about 5% of the population, versus probably 30 to 40% of the population, at least in particularly the West, you might say, or some of the perhaps the UK and the US, where I've seen most of the data, where about 40% of people think they don't need it. So in reality, there's an awful lot of people that are probably kidding themselves about short sleeping, and who would reap huge benefits from sleeping longer. And melatonin release is the green light for when we sleep and is linked into the circadian system, and that's often why people get pilots, and well, not so much pilots, but probably stewards and people working on planes who have traditionally tried to use melatonin as a way to help them manage jet lag and so forth. It can be used, but it's quite technically challenging in terms of when you take it and how much you take it. The other system is the system that is triggered by a chemical in the brain that creates pressure to sleep, and that chemical is called adenosine. I always have problems saying that, I do apologize. Adenosine. And this chemical is literally released for every minute that we're awake. So it's like a sort of sleep pressure that builds up through the day, and that also triggers sleep. So when the adenosine and the circadian clock work together, that's when they prompt us to go to sleep at night. And these forces are very interesting because they're typically aligned, but they don't actually coordinate. So when I say work together, they come together, and prompt us to go to sleep, but they're not linked in any formal way in terms of the systems. Now, the couple of things to mention here is some of you may be saying, well, I like to get up early in the morning, but I find I'm more tired at night. If you're like me, you're a lark. And then my others around there who say, well, gosh, I'm real night owl. You know, I love to get up, stay at night. When I was doing my MBA, I always did my essays through the night. That's how I work, and I now struggle because I'm meant to be awake and working by 9 o'clock in the morning. The news is that it's a genetic fate rather than a conscious fault, whether you're a night owl or a morning lark. This appears to be something that actually is genetically determined. So it's great if you can understand which you are and see how you can incorporate that into your work and how you can share that with your colleagues and actually just be very honest about it. And I'm absolutely a morning person, and I say to people, if you want me to do something, if they send me something late at night, I just say, I'll look at it first thing, but I'll get up early and look at it because that's the way I work best. The other thing to note, just talking about adenosine, is that adenosine is effectively masked by caffeine. So when you're taking lots of coffee late in the day or energy drinks and so forth to keep you going because you're feeling tired, that's exactly what it's doing. It's almost like it's throwing a blanket over the adenosine and cancelling it out. So that's why it works, but equally that's why it's not particularly healthy, because you're stopping a natural function within your body. Okay, so the business case for sleep. The best article I've ever read, I mean, I've written a book on the subject of sleep, but I think the best article I've ever read that really talks about the business case for sleep is that from Nick Van Dam and Els van der Helm, who wrote this in the McKinsey Quarterly a few years back. And I've worked quite a bit with Els and had a number of conversations with her, and she was kind enough to endorse my book. So they're a very fine organization, a company called Sleep that she started in Holland. And they've studied very carefully the business case for sleep. And the first thing, I'm actually going to read this out, because the first thing is that they've made it very, very clear about how important sleep mismanagement is. And it is, as they say, obviously an individual issue, but it's actually part of a larger energy management challenge that includes other forms of mental relaxation, as well as nutrition and physical exercise. And it's basically about people cutting corners around sleep. And in an increasingly hyper-connected world in which many companies now expect their employees to be on call or to answer emails 24/7, this is an important and organizational topic that requires specific and urgent attention. And they, in the article, they show a fair amount of data that shows essentially how many leaders are struggling with sleep, who feel under pressure to sleep less organizationally, and are really struggling, if you like, to stand up and say, no, that's enough. I need to switch off now. I need to get more sleep. And there are 4 key positive qualities supported by good sleep. I always like to stress the positives and stress the benefits you'll get. So if you can sleep better tonight, you will be more results orientated tomorrow. And what do I mean by this? I mean, this is the ability to improve your attention and concentration such that you can stay focused and also see the bigger picture. Now, I worked for an organization years ago that called this having what they called the helicopter ability. In other words, the ability to go down and look at the minutiae and the weeds of a business case or a particular challenge, and then literally go up vertically and actually go back to the strategic level. The ability to operate really, really, really with the detail and then the bigger picture. And scientists have shown that if you're awake for 20 hours or more, so you're not getting the sleep that you need, it is the same as being legally drunk in terms of your concentration and attention. Now, most of us, I think probably all of us on this call, wouldn't intentionally go to work drunk. However, that's what you're doing if you're not getting a sufficient amount of sleep, particularly if you're down to about 4 hours. And not only that, it's also affecting your ability to solve problems effectively. especially shortcuts and spotting patterns. And this is where an afternoon nap can be very, very helpful. And if you take it before 3 p.m., it's unlikely to affect your nighttime rhythm in terms of sleep. But there's multiple studies have shown that if you allow people to go off and have a nap early in the afternoon and then you'll come back and ask them to solve various challenging issues and work on a technical spreadsheet and essentially use their analytical functions especially, there will be a huge benefit. And the REM sleep, which is the part of sleep, I won't go into the detail on the difference between REM and non-REM, but that is the part, the deeper part of our sleep, when actually our creativity and integration of information and creative solutions is also developed. So it's both in terms of how you recover and how you integrate things to become more creative, but also your ability to focus at that particular time that will help you solve problems. And having worked for a major consultancy over the years, it was an interesting challenge because they would often ask you to work very late at night or early in the morning, and yet actually my efficiency in solving the problems was significantly reduced because I wasn't sleeping enough. A third thing, which I think many, many leaders will relate to, is the fact that when you're tired and it's late in the day, you simply just want to get away from the office or close the computer and spend some time doing something else. That is the time when seeking different perspectives is most challenging. And I can remember so many occasions in the management team I ran, particularly in Sri Lanka, where I had a colleague who was a fantastic guy, who was a reflective thinker. So he'd come in after the management meeting had been finished a couple of hours and say, Giles, I just got something I wanted to share with you about that decision we've just taken. There's a couple of other things I think we should have considered. And I would basically try and get him out of the room as quickly as possible. Now, why was that? Not because I didn't respect him, but I was so tired and at the end of the day that I couldn't really cope with this different perspective. Well, that was my failing to him, because the mental capability of mine at that particular day was not as strong as it should be. The opposite, however, is definitely true. If you get sufficient sleep, your mental capability for learning and willingness to learn and to memorize and integrate these different perspectives and avoid tunnel vision and bias will be greater. So often, if you get the chances to do so, then actually the old cliche of sleeping on it for a decision is not a bad one at all. Because almost certainly when you look at that data in the morning and with different perspectives, you'll have a fresh perspective, a much greater opportunity and a much greater capability, I should say, to actually integrate that knowledge. And the last great positive quality that good sleep can engender is supporting others. When we're short of sleep, we are not so clued in to people's emotional reactions to things. And it really harms our ability to build trusted relationships. And also, it saps us, if you like, of the energy and the willingness to support teams that you lead and also those that you work with. That's because to help others, you need first to have some level of understanding of what they're doing and what they're going through. And often you get those through the non-verbal cues. It's not what someone says or writes to you, it's the non-verbals you pick up on. It's not what they say, but it's how they're saying it to you, through facial expression or tone of voice, for example. And research suggests that when we are sleep deprived, we are more likely to misread these cues, to overreact, and to be more negative than we might otherwise be. Other studies show that we trust less when we are sleep deprived, and even that our teams are less engaged when we are in that state. Now, if you think about the amount of money and time organizations you've worked with and work in the past and now spend on employee engagement, the truth is that if the leaders of those organizations at whatever level that be, at team level or perhaps more senior levels up towards the C-suite, had more sleep, the chances are you'd have a more engaged organization because they'd be better leaders, better able to support others, be more acute problem solvers, more results orientated, and of course, seek different perspectives. And the last part of the business case really moves back to lessons from sport, which are partly physical, as I mentioned earlier, partly about the body and partly about the brain. The person on the left who's dodging the arrows is showing that when you're properly rested, you are much better when it comes to reaction times. And in fact, apparently our reaction times are 2 to 3 times better than when we're sleep deprived. Now, I don't know about you, but reaction times are incredibly important in business, I think, especially of those of us that drive regularly as part of our role, not just commuting, but perhaps going to see clients and so forth, but just our ability to respond as we should. It's incredibly important. Also, we make fewer mental errors when we are well rested. That's come through in many pieces of research about sportsmen and women. And actually, it reduces the injury rate. And I'm going to read this particular summary of a study from the University of California because I think it's particularly relevant. There's multiple studies that support this, but this particular one was into the injury rate of young athletes. And it said as soon as they sleep less than 6 hours a night, so that's about nearly 40% of you from the survey that we did earlier, their injury rates start to climb. In other research, it was found that the amount of sleep a high school athlete had was the strongest predictor of injuries, more accurate than the number of hours of practice or indeed any other parameter. So literally, how much people slept was directly related to their injuries. Now, many of you will have heard that in the training grounds of Premier League football clubs in the UK, they've now introduced sleep pods and rest areas and a whole menu of ways of getting people to sleep more and prioritize sleep. And that's really why, that's one of the main reasons, is they know that that is a link between sleep and injuries. And obviously they've invested in these high quality athletes and paid a lot of money for them, and their salaries are extremely high. They want to get that return on the investment. Sleep also prolongs your playing career. That's been shown through Major League Baseball research, but also Roger Federer is a great example of that in tennis. He sleeps typically 9 hours a night. He even hires 2 houses for Wimbledon when he comes, one for him and his trainers and one for his family. He's got, I think, 4 children, and he doesn't want to be disturbed during the championships. So there's many athletes who have long careers that will often credit sleep as a key reason for that. And for many athletes, they see an improvement, whether it be basketball, swimming, tennis, any other sports, in their accuracy and sprint times as a result. And I don't think it's any coincidence that one of the fastest animals on the planet is the cheetah, which can go from 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. And the cheetah routinely spends about 18 hours a day asleep. So, put up a couple of pointers up here for you regarding better sleep within organizations. I'm passionate about this, and I really believe that if we could get organizations sleeping better and resting better as a group, we would see huge improvement for all of us. First point, I think I'd say be the change you want to see. Where you have an opportunity with an organization to adjust times of webinars and sessions and so forth, and also to influence your boss or the teams that you lead, please do so. You really will see, this is an area where you absolutely have to walk the talk. It's no good saying to your team, you really need to get more sleep, and then send them emails at all hours of the day and night and expecting an immediate response. it just doesn't work. You've got to show yourself that you value rest, that you think it's important. And there's multiple ways that you can do that. One is setting meetings at sensible times. And I do hope that by setting this meeting at 12 or 1 o'clock, most people have been able to tune in at a time that is reasonable for them, either very early in the morning if you're in the US, or towards the end of your day if you're in Asia Pacific. Because it's, I think 12 to 1 o'clock in the UK, or 1 till 2 is about the only times that really works. Set boundaries on times that emails can be sent. Everybody needs a rest. Now, you may or may not know that certain well-known car firms in Germany, for example, have actually disabled routers between, I think it's 8 o'clock at night and 8 in the morning, because the white-collar unions pushed very, very hard and said, if you're going to be sending these emails 24/7, then our people need to be paid accordingly. So they actually stopped it because they didn't want to pay the extra money, but also it's a great way of making sure the employees got a proper rest. And certainly when I worked in oil trading, one of the ways we would save time and also increase energy and keep people, feeling positive, was to have stand-up meetings. Stand-up meetings are a great way of making sure you keep energized, you save time so people can leave earlier, and you keep meetings short, because people often sit down and get a bit too comfy and then start talking about things that are not really critical to engagement or a decision within the meeting. So you can even try this on Zoom. If you're having meetings that I'm on Zoom and everyone's got the cameras on, you can encourage people to stand up to keep the meeting shorter. Another way is to encourage walking meetings when the weather is reasonable. I know there's parts of the world where the temperature is either too hot or too cold, or times of the year when it doesn't work. But when it can be done, it's a great way, especially if you're engaging in coaching with your employees. It's a great way of actually having meetings. And also make sure that those that are in the office most of the time get most of the natural light. I know a leading consultancy in London that recently moved, and it made sure all the people in the most junior or administrative positions, or that were most likely to be in the office, sat around the edge of the building. In all the offices, which would typically have gone to the partners who were never there, they've now made sure those that are in the office get the most natural light. Because more natural light you get, the better your sleep. So moving a culture towards working smarter rather than longer hours is critical to sleep, and you'll definitely reap the rewards. And that's a real challenge in this time when many are working from home. So that's something you can really show as a leader. So 5 tips to help you sleep better, and then we can move on to the Q&A. The first one is routine, and I think this is really vital for most people at the moment. And when I talk to people who are having sleep problems, a lot of them talk about the fact they've lost their routine because they're now working at home more because of COVID. And this is a real challenge. So when I talk to people about it, I normally link routine to time, and I'll talk about time a bit later. But I just say, just block at least 8 hours a day for rest. Say 10 till 6 or 11 till 7 or midnight till 8 or whatever it is. Block that time and say to yourself, I'm not going to commit to anything else in that time apart from just rest or talking to my partner or whatever, but actually having some quiet time. And as soon as you start allocating time to sleep and just say that's rest time, most people find their sleep improves. Now, you may not sleep that whole 8 hours. You may only sleep 5, 6, 7, but you will almost certainly find that if you start to properly allocate time for sleeping, that your sleep will improve. Because you've just basically said, no, I can't, in between those hours of 10 and 6 or whatever it is, I can't do anything else. I deserve to have a rest. The next is caffeine intake. Now, I quit coffee 5 years ago. I didn't intend to quit it. I quit it for a month only, and I got such great benefits in terms of the way I felt and the way I slept that I never went back to coffee, despite the fact I love the smell of it. I still have a coffee machine at home. I still eat coffee cake occasionally. I really do enjoy coffee, but for me, that was my main source of caffeine. I don't drink black tea or green tea, both of which have plenty of caffeine in as well, by the way. Lots of people don't know that green tea is relatively caffeine rich. But cutting down on your caffeine, having less coffee during the day, not having a coffee after lunch, all these kinds of things can really help your sleep. However, if you quit it like I did overnight, you will expect to have at least 5 days of headaches, and it's really like going through cold turkey. So I certainly recommend people look at their caffeine intake and see how they can cut down if they're having problems with their sleep. Quitting it is an option. However, it's not for the faint-hearted. That's all I'd say. Do it when you've got some time off, or you can cope with the fact you're likely to have significant withdrawal symptoms. But of course, those withdrawal symptoms are the very things that remind you how dependent you become on the coffee or tea or whatever it is. Naps are a great way of getting quality sleep during the day, depending on the length and timing. This is one thing, if you are working from home, then the opportunity to have a nap is suddenly there in a way that it isn't quite so easily for most people in an office. And there's two types of nap, really. If you read articles about naps, you'll hear about lots of different types of nap. But to me, there's two main types that people engage in. One is the ideal nap, which NASA researched, the US organization which looks after obviously all the space programs and so forth. They had to research naps for their astronauts, and they found that 26 minutes was the ideal time for a nap. Now, don't ask me why it's not 25 or 27. NASA came up with 26. But most people will find that if they have a nap of about half an hour, they'll feel far better for it. I've been told, apologies, I think this is a fire alarm test going on in the building I'm in. 1 second. I've been told that if you take an espresso and then you lie down, you just have a quick espresso and lie down, after about 30 minutes, you will wake up naturally because the espresso kicks in. But obviously, given the amount of caffeine content, I wouldn't recommend that as a strategy. Far better to set an alarm or ask someone else to come in and wake you up after half an hour. But the 30-minute nap is great for refreshment, a great power nap. The full sleep cycle is, however, 90 minutes. And so if you're really tired at the weekend and you really want to have a good rest, if you can allow yourself an hour and a half and just don't set an alarm, you'll be far better for it. Fourth is time. If you can allow time to wind down before you go to bed, you will sleep better. What do I mean by winding down? I mean turning off electronic devices, putting the smartphone away, having no access to email and work messages and so forth, making a cup of tea and doing some of those things that you do need to do at the end of the day, some of those chores around the house, and talking to the family and the other half, which are certainly not chores, but all those sorts of things are great ways to unwind. Reading a book is another fantastic one. The converse of that is actually that it's a great way to start the day is to not turn immediately to your emails. That's a great temptation when you're working from home, is to wake up at 6 a.m. or earlier and go straight on your emails. In terms of your sleep, your brain it's a bit like an old car. It takes time to warm up. So you are far better off not to be throwing new stuff into your brain. And if you like, on top of the old stuff, you're far better off letting the night percolate through and actually recovering. So the last thing I mentioned is reading. I do think that I'm an advocate of reading generally, but many of us find that a very, very good way of unwinding, unless we're trying to read a business book and so forth. And certainly when I went through a phase of waking up regularly at 3 a.m. and was trying to improve my sleeping, I would read on paper rather than something that emits a blue light. I'd read an autobiography or a novel that I was very interested in and so forth. And I found that after about an hour of reading, I want to go back to sleep, and I generally go back for another 90 minutes, a full cycle. So certainly I found reading, particularly if you're struggling at night, is a great way of unwinding. Another way is to have an Epsom salt bath, or to take something that has magnesium in it. Magnesium is also a great trigger for sleep, and is not naturally produced in the body. So we have to take it in through things like broccoli and other superfoods that are rich in magnesium, or tablets, or actually having a bath with some like Epsom salts or some other salts that contain magnesium is a very, very good way of taking magnesium into the system. So something I'm very passionate about, as you can tell, sleep. Thank you for listening. I'd be delighted to take some questions from you. Here are my contact details. My book is available on Amazon and other good bookshops. Delighted if you want to email me directly on the subject. I do post occasionally on Instagram, and probably easiest to find me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thanks, Giles. Absolute fantastic presentation, a lot of great insights and obviously talking points. I know definitely I'm going to take a few of them and practice them this evening. So just to let everyone know, if you've got any questions, please feel free to type them in, and obviously we'll put them forward to Giles now. And if we don't have time to answer them all, don't worry, we'll pass them over to Giles so he can get in touch in obviously the next week or so.
Happy to do that.
So with the first question which has come in, it's around melatonin. So they're saying, what is your view and advice on melatonin tablets? Do they work?
I think they can, and I know people that swear by them, particularly stewards and people who are in jobs where they suffer from jet lag. I think the two things to note on melatonin. One is different brands have different amounts of melatonin in the tablet. I don't believe there's any proper jurisdiction or legislation around the melatonin content in tablets. So you have to check how much melatonin you're actually taking in. And if you find a brand that works for you, stick with that brand. That will be the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is really that, particularly if you're changing time zones, it's quite good to go and see a doctor or Google these things and actually start to look at people who give specific advice about when you take the melatonin, because it is a bit of an art as to when to take it, and make sure that it really helps you. So sort of taking it just, I don't know, after every meal or rather randomly isn't beneficial. You actually have to think about when you take it. So that's something that a GP could help you with in Britain, with general practitioner or a doctor, or you'll probably find some resources on the web that would give you some suggestions around that.
Perfect, excellent. A lot of questions coming in now. So next question, they're asking, we talk a lot about the effects of not enough sleep or poor sleep, but is oversleeping bad too?
I think there is quite a bit of evidence that suggests if people are sleeping more than 9 hours habitually, that may be a problem. It may be linked to some physical disability, lethargy, or something that's not working quite as it should within the body, and or mental health as well. You often find people who are depressed or have significant mental health challenges, they will sleep more than 9 hours a day. So I think once you get much over 9 regularly, it may be worth considering whether you should again seek some medical opinion on or have a medical and see if there's anything going on, because both either physiologically or mentally there may be a link between that and the amount of sleep you get. Can I just say one more thing on that, Paul?
Yeah,
actually?
Of course, yeah, definitely.
One thing I didn't get a chance to catch, and maybe a question that's coming anyway, is a lot of people ask me, can I catch up on the weekend? Can I just sleep can I burn the candle all week, 4 or 5 hours, Sunday to Thursday as it were, and Friday, Saturday night, I'll go out late and then I'll sleep until lunchtime. Unfortunately, the research suggests that doesn't work in terms of your mental capability. And that's why I asked the question about sleep within a 24-hour period rather than just overnight. If you've slept poorly the previous night, then making sure you catch up with a nap in the afternoon or an early night the next day, you'll be fine. But if you habitually short sleep, that's when you start to suffer from the kind of physical and particularly mental issues we have. So that the whole idea of, of just topping up at the weekends, it doesn't really provide optimum performance.
Thank you. Perfect. So we've got a question which has come in. They're asking if there's different levels or stages of sleep.
There are, and actually, if I have had more time to discuss it, I would have gone into some detail on that. And that's certainly something I cover in quite a lot of detail in the book. Just to summarize them, obviously we go into sleep is essentially in a 90-minute cycle, and I'm just getting something to hand here so I can make sure I give you a fuller answer. Yes. There are different stages of sleep, the REM sleep and the non-REM sleep, and non-REM can be divided into other stages as well. The REM sleep is the one which, if you watch anyone who's asleep at that point, you often see their eyes moving, and it's almost like their eyes start darting around. Sometimes you can almost see that, and that's often associated with a higher degree of dreaming. And that's when we tend to dream the most. Whereas the non-REM sleep, because REM stands for rapid eye movement, so the times when our eyes aren't darting around like that is when we're actually more relaxed, and especially the frontal cortex starts to do the sorts of reflection and storing and the kind of good work that I was talking about earlier that we need to do when we're sleeping in terms of upgrading our operating system. It's sometimes called, that type of sleep is sometimes called a nocturnal cerebral meditation. And basically, if we slept 5 cycles, so 7.5 hours, sleep being typically a full sleep cycle, typically being 90 minutes, what you'd find is as each cycle goes on, there's less and less of the REM sleep at the beginning, more and more of this very deep sleep, and then as we come towards the end of those 5, for cycle 4 and 5, we actually get quite a lot of REM sleep towards the end there, which was sometimes the dream cycle. And that's why quite often at the end of a cycle we'll be in that REM dream mode, and we'll wake up and think, oh, the dream woke us up, because that's often a time when we actually dream. So yes, there are different stages of sleep, and through the night, the architecture of your sleep, if you like, will be slightly different. If anyone's interested, just drop me a note on LinkedIn. I've got a slide that shows this quite well, but it takes a little bit of time to explain, so hence I didn't include it in the deck for today.
Thanks, Giles. So this has been a very popular question coming, so I'm going to sort of just rephrase it so we sort of cover every person's sort of question which has come in. So the question is that they seem to have an issue with trying to get to sleep. Is there any apps or techniques that you feel are great to overcome this issue?
There are, I think, a couple of very good things to do to get to sleep, or 3, I'll mention 3. I'm sure there are apps that will help you. I'll just say I am not a user of apps when it comes to sleep. Why is that? Because I think generally electronic devices and things that you might have on your phone are things that you should put in another room. My firm belief is that tablets, smartphones, and other devices that you may need to run an app on are best left outside the room in which you're going to sleep. Why is that? Because as soon as you start playing with the app, you might see an email come in or a message, and you'd be very tempted to answer it, and you start getting into a work or social discussion cycle, using maybe a device that's emitting a blue light that's actually prompting you to be more awake than you might otherwise be. So I tend to not use apps. I'm sure there's 20 or 30 people on this call that can point to sleep apps they've used that have been helpful to them. So I'm not anti them. I'm just saying, for me, I would look at other solutions that are more natural, if you like. One option is a wonderful mindfulness technique called body scanning. And that was one of the first things that really helped me when I was struggling with my sleep. And I read about it in a book that my brother was kind enough to give me, and it really made a massive difference. Now, what do I mean by body scanning? I mean you literally lie there and you start to, it's also something called noticing the sensations. You lie there and you actually focus on each part of the body in turn. So you either start with your toes or you start with the top of your head, and then you slowly scan through the body until you reach the other end. And you spend about 10 or 15 seconds on each part of the body, thanking them. And I introduce gratitude as well. I just say thank you to my toes for what they've done for me for today. Sounds a bit unusual, but it's a way of making sure I focus on that part of the body. And you go up and down. And if you scan your body in that way, it takes a couple of minutes, a few minutes to do each cycle. I don't think I've ever done more than 3 or 4 cycles because I've fallen asleep by then. So I find it an incredibly powerful and very simple thing to do, just lying in bed. So that's one thing I'd recommend. The second thing is an Epsom salt bath, as I've mentioned, especially if you're late at night. Epsom salt is fantastic. For those of you that have baths, I realise there's probably a lot of people on this call that only have showers, but that could be another way. And a third way that is increasingly people are finding is the use of a weighted blanket. Now, these blankets are not that expensive and can be bought, and you typically need to buy a blanket that's about 10% of your body weight. And if you use that, that gives you the sensation of being swaddled, if you like, as a child when you were wrapped up very, very tightly, often in blankets and so forth. And I have actually started using a weighted blanket this year, and I found it incredibly useful as a way of getting back to sleep. I'm not someone who ever had a problem getting to sleep, but my issue was the 3 a.m. wake up. How on earth do I get back to sleep? And I found it really helpful with that. So I'd say the mindfulness technique, which is, again, I think it's on page 18 of the book, page 18 and 19, in more detail, or just look up body scanning. You'll probably find it on the web. Epsom salt baths, and also consider a weighted blanket.
Perfect, thank you. We've had loads of questions come in. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll have time to answer them all, but they'll be put forward to Giles afterwards. So I think we've got time for 2 more questions. So it's almost the reverse effect. So they're saying it's coming quite a few times. So I'll put it together. They seem to be waking up feeling exhausted and not fully refreshed or rested. Why do you think this is, and how can they improve and overcome this?
There's probably 2 key drivers of that. One is if they're relying on an alarm clock to wake them up, and that alarm clock is waking them up in the middle of a sleep cycle. So they've only slept, say, 6.5 hours, and they really need to sleep 7.5, and this alarm clock is waking them up in the middle of a cycle. That's one of them. So the answer to that is either don't set an alarm if you can get away with it, or set the alarm later, or go to sleep, or try to go to sleep earlier, go to bed earlier. That's you need. That's saying to you, you need more sleep. So that's your body's way of saying it. So one way is probably that there is something that's waking you up in the middle of a sleep cycle. The other may just be that the quality of sleep you're getting isn't right, so that you're actually not getting the deep sleep that you need to be restorative, and that could be because you're waking up in the night, or you're getting disturbed, or in some cases, if you suffer from sleep apnea, which can be these micro wake-ups, and that's something that I have experienced. Now, that's worth talking to your doctor about, and if you do, they can actually give you a form of ventilator that can actually help with that. I believe ventilators obviously were very short supply during the worst time of COVID, but I think it's probably easy to get them now. But there are machines that you can use. Again, I have used them in the past that can help you with that. So those can be other reasons why so when I talk about micro wake-ups, these are where you're waking up for a split second and you don't know that you are, but because you are waking up for a split second, that's actually affecting the depth of your sleep, and you're not getting the amount of particularly non-REM sleep that you need for full recovery.
Lovely, thank you. We've got time for 1 more question. So this has come in quite a few times as well. So they're asking, is making the shift from night out, or is the preference hardwired into us?
My understanding, what I've read is it's essentially a genetic thing. So it is pretty much hardwired. There's not much we can do about it. So the best way then is to accept it, I think, and find ways to cope with it. Either that be in terms of the sort of work pattern you have, or in terms of when you take decisions. So for example, if my partner were to say to me, can we discuss this at 10 o'clock at night? I'd say, no, please we'll talk about it in the morning, because that's just, I'm better emotionally and cognitively to discuss this. So I think for most of us, we're best off accepting that that's genetically how we are and finding ways to then work our life around that.
Perfect, thank you. That seems to be all the time we've got for today. So I'd just like to thank Giles again for a great session. Don't worry, all the questions which have come in and we haven't had time to answer will be passed over to Giles, who'll get in touch. The session is being recorded, so a week from today you'll receive an email with a link to the recording to obviously listen to Giles's presentation, and obviously you can listen to it as much as possible. Just before we go, just like will be taking place on the 11th of November at 12 to 1 GMT, and that will be with Charlie Redding, and he'll be discussing creating entrepreneurial happiness, make more, work less, and enjoy the ride. So if you'd like to join that webinar, please head over to the Amber and BGA website, where you'll be able to fill out the registration page to join that session. So just before we go, I'd like to thank Giles for, again, a great session and taking the time out to speak to everyone today. And we look forward to seeing everyone on the webinar shortly.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.